Joining me now to unpack this historic moment is a religious historian and Professor Emeritus at Massey University, Dr. Peter Lineham. Peter, wonderful to catch up with you.
It's good to be talking to you, Leah.
For those that don't know, Peter and I used to appear together many moons back. Peter, wasn't it, on the AM show? They'd get us in on what they called the panel to have a little chat.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. We didn't always agree, but I enjoyed my little times with Peter. We've got a new pontiff, Peter, and an American. Is this a big deal or is it not?
I think it is a big deal. I'm sure that when the cardinals were weighing up who to select, they were trying to work out which way the church should be facing. And the two things I think weighed on them. I think they thought they couldn't stay in Europe, but then a lot of the prominent names that had been speculated about, actually the speculation had done them no good. I think people were quite nervous at the speculation. So to choose an American, but a relatively little-known American, was, I think, probably quite smart.
Yeah, and he holds a dual passport, doesn't he, in Peru? So we say American,
yes,
born American, but spent a lot of time out of America.
Yes, I had thought that being a Latin American would have weighed against him because the second Latin American mightn't be, quite the signal you'd want to send. But then you can always say, well, he's a North American actually in birth. And so that may have been how they justified it.
Peter, the Cardinals took around about 2 days to come to their decision. Did that suggest to you that he quickly impressed his peers during the secretive process?
Well, so I think there would have been 4 rounds of voting, as far as we know. And so that's one more than it took to get Francis.
Yeah.
Francis had come completely from the outside, but his name had been speculated at the time when Benedict was chosen. Pope Leo XIV was working in the Vatican, will have had contact with many, many bishops in the church and cardinals. So that's an advantage when you know the system and the structure. You're much more likely for cardinals to vote for you when they know what you're like and how you respond. And I think that was a significant factor with so many new cardinals.
So he's chosen Pope Leo XIV, or has he chosen it? Does he choose Peter, or is it chosen for him?
He chooses the name. That is entirely up to him. I'm sure every single cardinal of those 133, each had a name that they would have chosen if it had fallen on them.
But how significant is it, Peter, the choice that they make?
It is very significant.
Right.
Because it signals which pope you look up to in the past, which pope that reflects the values that you want to convey. You see, he could have chosen to be Francis II, and although he'd worked closely with Francis, he didn't make that choice. He did, in his opening address, make sort of sounds that reflect his closeness to Francis. But Leo XIII, his immediate namesake, was Pope from, was it 1878 until the early 20th century, and is most famous for being the Pope who introduced a system of a theory of how labour should be valued for their work in the famous decree De Rerum Novarum. And so this calling for that labourers were worthy of their pay suggests that he does want to have an emphasis on the well-being of people. But secondly, he's going back to the 19th century. He's not choosing John Paul III. He's not choosing Benedict. You see, he's making a deliberate choice to go back to the traditional church.
Yes. And what was interesting to me too, Peter, was Pope Francis appointed cardinals from Myanmar, Rwanda, Tonga. This was the first time fewer than half of the voting cardinals were European. Is that correct?
Yes, that's quite correct. It's an amazing transformation that's taken place.
Mm.
But remember, of course, given that they're so diverse, they had to spend 7 days getting to know each other.
Yeah.
Because, with different languages and different backgrounds. And imagine if you had brought somebody completely from outside to run the Vatican. The enormous challenge that they would have if they didn't speak Italian. Leo is clearly linguistically able English, Italian, Spanish, and obviously Latin as well.
Yes. The cardinals of the 133 voting, all in secrecy, Peter. The world still to this day really doesn't know exactly what goes on in there. I mean, you can tell us, but has anyone been able to ever really penetrate the group to know more? Didn't someone once sneak in?
Yes, at the last election, somebody got as far as getting to the door before they were turned away. They were dressed up as a cardinal but were a fraud. So, I think in the end there wouldn't have been a place for them, and it would have been very obvious.
Yeah.
But there are lots of stories about what happened, and occasionally later on, some cardinal will tell the story of what happened. But we don't really know. But it is, if you think about it, with 4 ballots, and they would declare the result after each ballot, and they're looking for a 2/3 majority.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably there must have been, say, half a dozen candidates in the first round, and then they left for the day from the Sistine Chapel, and then they would have talked late into the night, comparing notes of which of these was viable. And so gradually the numbers would have reduced down, and one can assume that for that last round there were probably just 2 names being put forward.
Peter, you mentioned how important the name is of whom they choose, because they've obviously, it's a pope they've looked up to. And Leo was a confidant of Francis, and seemed to be a candidate that he really, Francis to him he looked up to. Does that also give you clues that he would also pursue a similar progressive agenda?
I am not at all confident that he will have a progressive agenda. I think he has been comfortable with some of Francis's changes, but remember, the actual changes that Francis has introduced haven't been large. He's banned the use of the Latin Mass except in exceptional circumstances, which has made him very unpopular with traditionalists.
Mm.
He has made it easier for divorced Catholics to return to communion in the church. But most of what he's done has been gestures to people outside that have endeared him to non-Catholics, but to priests and bishops of a more traditional bent. There was a kind of negative aspect about Francis. They didn't like him. And I think we will find a much more careful Pope who will be more likely to go on a middle road, not on the extremes of either left or right of the church.
Interesting, because when you talk about the left or the right of the church, was it true that in the lead up to the conclave there were certain groups almost trying to woo cardinals, taking them out to lunch in Rome to try and influence them? Or what were they trying to do?